and welcome back to The Marketing Hustle. If you love hearing unfiltered stories from bold brands on how they do their marketing, you're in the right place. I'm really excited about this. This is our first interview in our new series with CMOs. So you told me that the founder interviews that we used to do were great, but sometimes we didn't really get into the good stuff. So this time we're hearing from the marketing leaders themselves. Ivo van den Brand was the outgoing CMO of Too Good To Go when we caught up. After growing the business to a whopping 120 million users. Yes, 120 million users in 19 markets, which is so much bigger than I thought. In the conversation, we talked about how the CMO role is actually all about leadership and not a lot about marketing, why partner marketing is way sexier than it sounds, and his view that PR is very much not dead. I'm really excited to hear what you think. Before we get into the conversation with Ivo, I'm going to steal a few seconds of your attention to explain what I actually do, because I know that it can be really confusing. So I am obsessed with all things startup marketing, and I run 3 businesses that might help you at any stage on your journey with all of this marketing stuff. So Upworld is a community and training service for people in marketing jobs. So if you're a founder, get your team involved. If you're in a marketing role, you need to be involved in UpClub. UpTalent is a talent and recruitment business, so we help build teams and help people find roles. And Brand Hackers runs fractional marketing teams for brands with big dreams. So if you're looking at new, unusual ways of resourcing your marketing, get in touch.
Okay, I want to start with some of those absolutely wild growth numbers that you just reeled off. You just so casually were like, billions of users, blah, blah, blah. Tell us how big this thing's got.
Too Good To Go. Too Good To Go, I mean, every time I think about it, it is actually quite impressive how big it is. So Too Good To Go is active in 19 different countries now. The beauty is a lot of people think it's only local and it's a local business.
I genuinely thought it was only in the UK.
Yeah, no, it's founded in Denmark, in Copenhagen originally, just so where our HQ is.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're big in Western Europe. And then we also recently, less than a year ago, launched Australia, which is flying. We're in North America, we're in the US, we're in Canada. So 19 different countries, 120 million users.
Okay.
And 185,000 partners. And when we say partners, we mean businesses who sell their leftover food via the Too Good To Go marketplace app.
Okay.
So it's big.
And that's an awful lot of food.
That is a lot of food, yes. It's between 300 and 400,000 meals that we save from going to waste every day. It's unbelievable.
That is extraordinary.
But if you think about the food waste challenge, it's huge. So what a lot of people don't realize, and what we often talk about in Too Good To Go, is 40%, 40% of all the food that we produce in the world goes to waste. And that's particularly poignant given that it's responsible for 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a major contributor to climate change. And secondly, this all happens in a world where between 700 and 800 million people are affected by hunger every day.
So fucked up.
So yes, we often talk about it as it's probably the dumbest problem that we have as society.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And you're saving 300 to 400,000 meals every day, and yet you are scratching the top of the surface of the impact that's needed.
Yeah, we often talk about we save 4 meals every second, and then there's 80,000 more to save.
So keep up the hard work.
Exactly. Yeah. So the vision for the company is we dream of a planet with no food waste, but we're a long way off from realizing that. But equally, I think the positive note on it is there is something that people can do. So there's real optimism and positivity, and your ability as an individual person to reduce a bit of food waste, either in your home, avoid unnecessary wastage, or by using the Too Good To Go app and picking up a surprise bag.
Are your customers driven by desire to have an impact, or are they driven by price, or both?
I think it's probably a combination.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting when we go down how we approach marketing in Too Good To Go and how we slightly pivoted the brand over the course of the last 3 years. We were always quite a rational brand, which makes a lot of sense, right?
Okay.
So the obvious thing you want to do is raise awareness for the challenge. A lot of people didn't know that 40% of all food goes to waste.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily know what the impact is on the environment, on the economy and society, which makes sense. I didn't know either before I joined Too Good To Go. And the default, I guess maybe not the default, but a logical step would be to then raise the awareness around some of these things and throw all the numbers around. But that becomes a very rational and often very academic brand if you only talk about those things. And then secondly, as a user, there's all these rational elements of, well, you get great food at great value for money from your local favorites. We have a variety of different stores that you can pick from. But again, all very rational attributes.
Yeah.
So value for money is definitely something that we know is what attracts people to the Marketplace app and converts them to being users.
Yeah.
We'd like to believe that the ability to make an impact and the ability to do something good for the planet is something that keeps people. So we know that the conversion or the initial user growth is, look at all this amazing food I got from Planet Organic or Pretz or whatever it might be. But then knowing that you do something well, positive, and that you have a good impact on the environment, we'd like to believe that that's what keeps people coming back.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'm endlessly fascinated by how you take so many different diverse brands that are doing something that is impact led, and the answer is so often the same, which is that customers come for one reason and stay for sustainability.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big learning curve. I think 5 years ago, I think we all went to market with sustainability as our lead message.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting that yes, this problem is so big. Yes, we're beginning to see the impact of this problem in our lives. And yet it's the secondary messaging.
Well, I often think if sustainability was such a powerful driver in large scale action, then we wouldn't be in this place. We have a reality in which climate change is very, very real. People are aware of it, I think, and have been aware of it for a long time, but clearly nothing has changed. So if it was so effective in driving large scale societal change, then we wouldn't be here.
Exactly.
But I do think it has a real place. And I think back to the brand, I think on top of that very rational argument around this is the nature of the challenge, this is why it's so big, this is how it links to environmental impact. And then the other functional attributes, which are good food, great value for money from your local favorites, and a huge amount of range of food. If we can dial up that emotional sentiment around this is how it feels in this reality where you think you have no power to affect this huge thing, we actually give you the power as an individual. And that sense of empowerment, I often feel empowerment is a word that gets used a lot, but doesn't really mean anything. And to me, it means we give power where people think they have none. And I think this really does that, because meal by meal, you can actually make a real tangible impact.
You talked about brand evolution over 3 years. Has that been around becoming more emotional?
Yes, it's been, we launched the new brand positioning a couple of years ago, and a new visual identity and a verbal identity. And we did really want to move away from it being too activist and too much about this is the problem, this problem is bad, you need to do something differently, to more emotional and more collaborative and really taking people along that journey and to expressing the positive benefits of reducing food waste on the environment and really dialing up that sense of empowerment and the optimism and the positivity.
Well, it's carrot and stick. You know, we can, it's like we give ourselves dopamine hits and rewards for doing good behavior, which I think Too Good To Go does beautifully in the whole product experience, as opposed to being like beaten up by this negative reality.
Yeah, no, so I think it's great to hear. And we definitely want to dial up the fun, and we'd want to dial up the meaning and the empowerment. And if you can walk away from that handover thinking that was fun, and then unpack the bag and think, this is great, this is good food, this is great value for money. And then afterwards reflect and think, I've done something really good here and really powerful. That's an incredible mix of emotions for you to maybe tell your friends or keep coming back.
I want to know what you think a CMO job is.
So I would say for me, because Too Good To Go is a sizable business, it's a scale up. It's definitely not a startup anymore. It's a scale up.
How big's the team?
Well, we have about 1,200 people as a total company, and then we have over 100 people in marketing. But then the definition of marketing is obviously, it depends a bit country by country.
Okay.
In our case, communications and PR falls on the marketing.
Yeah.
Public affairs falls on the marketing. We have all of our creative team in-house. So that's obviously quite a sizable team. And then we have brand, we have partner marketing, we have multiple different functions that all fall under there: growth marketing, CRM, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a big team.
Yeah.
And as such, the vision's really important.
Yeah.
The leadership is really important.
Yeah.
And then because we are a scale up, you will always still need to go and dive into the different topics. What is really interesting about working in a mission-driven company, it puts different pressures, I think, on leadership, because a lot of people join a mission-driven company, and to everyone, including myself, including senior management, including everyone that works with us, it tends to mean more than maybe some other jobs. So it means you have more responsibility with all of the decisions you take, but also you need to have more empathy that some of the decisions you make, changes you make, directions you set, people might have a stronger emotion associated with that decision because it means so much in their hearts and their minds about where the company's going, how we do it. And a super, super tangible example is when we changed our brand identity. So we evolved our visual identity accordingly: new logo, new visual identity, new fonts, new colors, etc., etc. We made a very conscious decision that it would be ironic if we would be wasteful. So when we launched the new visual identity, we said, if there are assets out there that have either been deployed or still waiting to be deployed with the old branding on it, we do not want to waste them.
Okay.
So as a purist brand marketeer, not ideal.
Yeah. Really uncomfortable.
Because you have things with the old logo going out there. But we made a conscious decision. We do not want to be wasteful. We do not want to discard these. So we had a soft phase out. And you will see window stickers with the old logo in some of our partner stores. And you will sometimes even see images with the old logo on a paper bag. But that's what it is. And I think that was a conscious decision that we fully stand behind. But as a purist brand marketer in a different type of company, you would probably not have taken the same decision. And similarly, all of our print materials are obviously recycled materials. That's not even negotiable.
No, of course.
And my business cards are made out of actual food waste, which is unbelievable.
Amazing.
So there's all these little choices that you need to think about and all these little decisions.
Yeah.
And also in terms of when you make structural changes, which in a scale up happens a lot, right? So everything you did yesterday is not going to be good enough tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we often say, what got us here won't get us there. So you're in constant flux and you're constantly reevaluating and recalibrating what the expectations are. But then when you make changes, it will mean a lot to people because they will have an opinion about it and they're so emotionally invested. And I think as a leader, it's then really, really important to have empathy for that and to be vulnerable and to recognize that someone might have an opinion about it and be willing to listen to that and to be open to that and respect people's feelings. But I think in my case, that's the role of a CMO. It's as much leadership as it is marketing. And then marketing is the vision, but then also realizing that in a scale up, that vision will probably change and pivot all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm very open. There's a lot of situations in which I really do not have the answer. And then I think back to that leadership, it's about being vulnerable to say, I don't know the answer, but let's ask all the questions and let's be curious and let's figure it out and let's use data and creativity to try and find a solution.
Yeah.
And we are building the plane whilst we're flying it. We're probably even designing the plane in many ways whilst we're flying it.
Hoping it stays afloat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's super uncomfortable at times.
Yeah.
And it means more to people.
How do you manage a team through that crazy change?
I think for me, it's openness and make time for people and have respect for people's emotions and what they're going through. And I will say I think it takes a lot of energy to open a video call or start a meeting, not knowing what the emotions are in a room and take a moment to assess what the emotions are and to then respond appropriately, as opposed to just go and get out of that meeting what you want. I mean, something as simple as every meeting, I always start with, how are you doing? But it's not just because we need to say the words. I actually want to
I'm genuinely telling me the answer.
Exactly. And then I think that's really important because I think if you consistently put that energy in and that's how you build trust, and you can also be vulnerable and open about how you feel, then I think it becomes easier to have those conversations. But it starts with empathy, and it starts with seeing people and listening to people and recognizing where they are and what they're going through. But it is tough. I mean, working in a scale up requires resilience, right? Because you're constantly recalibrating what is expected. And that goes for the whole of marketing, that goes for individual functions within marketing, and it goes for individual people. And I could do a great job today, and then tomorrow I'm not. And to be okay with that with that discomfort, and to also voicing that and articulating it and recognizing, I appreciate this is real and this is uncomfortable, but let's figure it out together, I think is really important.
Do you look back on your tenure as CMO and think there were 3 big changes I made? Or like, can you see a bird's eye summary of your impact?
Yes, 100%. I think I've been with Too Good To Go for 3 years and I've just left.
Yeah.
And over the 3 years, it was quite an interesting phase because when I joined, we were very much just on the tail end of the startup, wanting to be a scale up. It was also during the time in which the economy changed and the focus shifted from growth to profitability.
Okay.
And that was the change that coincided with me being hired. So we made the changes. We built a more scalable model. We did a global restructure for the whole company to make sure that we were more scalable and more set up for success. Because ultimately, we had 17 markets at the time. We knew we wanted to grow. And at some point, you just need a different structure to facilitate that. And we became profitable as a company, which is amazing. And I think that also put then a lot of pressure on leadership, because when you make those changes and everything I just talked about, then you get a lot of emotional responses, and rightly so. And taking the time to navigate the organization through that and to constantly provide clarity, focus, and empathy, which I think is really important to navigate through that change, to constantly do that day after day with so many different people. I think I look back at that thinking that was probably, for me, the most difficult thing to do, but also the most rewarding thing. And then secondly, when we changed the brand identity,
Yeah.
and we became more emotional and more collaborative and more optimistic, in addition to still driving the awareness and the seriousness of and the gravity of the food waste challenge and the visual identity that came with that. I think that's big. And then thirdly, super tactical. I think it's a bit of an unsung hero in a marketing mix, but partner marketing and trade marketing is really important for us.
Let's talk about it. I completely agree. It is not sexy, and no one says partner marketing is the thing that's going to make the difference. So, like, unpack it for me. How have you done
Yeah,
it?
for us, I think it's super important. So the nature of our business model, we don't necessarily have the unit economics or the budgets, the size of the budgets to justify huge above the line campaigns.
And this is fascinating. We should explain this. And that's because a customer pays £5.
Yeah, so we have a relatively low average order value.
Yeah.
So a relatively low transaction, because how the marketplace works is a bakery or a supermarket will have food left over at the end of the day. They can sell it through the marketplace at a third of the original price.
Okay.
So if you take £15 worth of bread, you sell it at £5.
Okay.
We take a small commission off that £5 transaction.
Yeah.
So £5 compared to maybe the average order value of another marketplace of food delivery is vastly different.
And is your lifetime value high? Do customers stick around?
Customers stick around fairly well, so I think retention is good, lifetime value is good, but it's probably not too dissimilar to a lot of other marketplaces. So the playbook needs to be different. Never two companies are the same, right? And we would be foolish to try and play exactly the same as another marketplace with different unit economics, but also different strengths. And our strength is we have a lot of partners who want to talk about what they are doing to reduce food waste. This is a real strength and opportunity for the business. And I think over the course of the last 3 years, and when I say we, I mean especially the partner marketeers and the partner marketing team that we have really, really raised the bar in how we enable our partners in a scalable and efficient manner to talk to their audiences in a high quality, well-branded, co-branded manner about the impact they make with the Too Good To Go app.
Put a lot of work into this.
Yes.
I've never been given a brief, for example, to recruit for a really excellent partner marketing team. And I think that's a problem. So if you were giving advice to someone who was at the early stages of this, what is really good? What are the basics of really good partner marketing?
I think it's the basics of every marketing job, which is understanding your audience. And I think interestingly with partner marketing, it's a bit like PR in many ways that it's B2B to C, right?
Yes.
So you have to go through that channel to understand their audience.
Yes.
And I think that always comes with a bit of complexity because you need to appeal to the partner, but you also need to deliver something that is of a quality and a standard that appeals
Yes.
to the audience of the partner. And I think that is always the complexity. I find that really fascinating and interesting, just like PR is interesting because you're speaking through media to another audience. And I think that role in many ways is very similar, that you need to understand the audiences really well and then be able to articulate it and create something that is scalable, doesn't cost them a lot of time, because you need to understand that these partners drive an operational machine. They don't want...
You are not their priority.
we are not their priority. And also, you could argue they're doing marketing for us as much as for themselves. So you need to convince them that it's valuable to them. So there's so many different elements, whether it's sales skills, whether it's audience centricity, but also just really attention to detail and delivering something that is of quality and professionalism and constantly pushing the boundaries of what good looks like in terms of the delivery.
So very high quality, deep understanding of the audience. I think there's a piece around practicality and simplicity.
Yeah, scalability.
Scalability, keep it super simple, do it very well.
Yeah,
Do basics very, very well.
yeah, and consistently.
Exactly.
Consistently over intensity.
Not about the big ideas, it's about the showing up. We talked about PR, which from what I've read was kind of your second big channel. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's fair. I think traditionally, way before I joined, I think Too Good To Go was, I mean, the story is incredible, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the people who came up with Too Good To Go are absolute legends. They realized there's a big societal problem here. This problem should be solved or at least addressed. And let's build a business model all around solving that problem. And literally, the more the business grows and the more effective the business is, the more we solve that problem.
Beautiful.
And we often refer to it as a win-win-win business.
Yeah.
Because users get great food at great value for money. Businesses get to sell their unsold food, get a bit of extra revenue for the food that would otherwise go to waste, and drive people into their store. Great win. And then we help save the planet because we reduce carbon emissions, et cetera, et cetera.
The fourth win is that it works. Yeah.
Exactly. It works. It scales very, very well. And I think it's a great example for other businesses to say,
Absolutely.
you can build a business model around solving a societal problem.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be a planet problem. It could be a society problem. Telling that story from either of those wins or all of the wins, it resonates and people get it.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of people often have this moment where they think, wow, this is so simple yet so brilliant. And as such, PR has always been a really, really powerful channel for us, and a channel that drove a lot of organic word of mouth and a lot of organic visibility, and would get us a lot of inbound from both the partner side, because people would express their interest, say, can we get on board of this, but also from the user side.
So what do you make of the adage that PR is dead?
Oh, I think that's nonsense. I think...
I thought you might.
Yeah, I think I worked in PR for 10 years. So I'm quite an atypical CMO in that respect, because I started my career at a PR agency.
Yeah.
I don't think it's dead. I think it changes.
I was going to say, if it's not dead, how's it changed?
Obviously, there's a lot fewer editors on any editorial team now. There's a lot less time to deep dive into things. The world's getting faster. Social media puts a lot of pressure on media to deliver something fast or to go deep, but then they have the resource restrictions to go deep. Those are all real challenges for editors and for journalists that we shouldn't overlook. But I think, as with any challenge, I think I might not necessarily have the answer, but there is an answer. I mean, every problem has a solution. And PR is definitely not dead. There are stories to be told, and there are people who go to certain places to read those stories. And social media is not the end of it.
No.
And I think PR definitely has a role to play, but it will need to evolve.
I've asked that question in different contexts, and I've been told that some people might say to me, well, print media's dying, but but now it's all about the influencer and it's about digital PR and this is a different landscape. You seem to be really like challenging that. Like what I'm hearing is that you're like, no, but people are still reading. They're reading news outlets. They're reading long form.
Yeah, some
Text.
people are, and some people are reading short form. But I think the format of the content, whether it's long or short or digital or print or whatever, comms is or PR is PR, and I think it's about conveying a story through the medium of people who can tell that story in a credible manner.
Yeah, yeah.
And sometimes maybe those are bloggers, sometimes those are influencers, sometimes those are creators, sometimes those are journalists. But I think that is still a skill that is very, very valuable.
And that to you is the skill of PR is leveraging authority and credibility to tell a story on your behalf.
Yes. And I think the other element of that is to use creativity and curiosity to create news when you think there is none. I think that was always the skill in PR. And how do you cut through and get the attention from someone who has an audience?
How do you do it?
Yeah, I think you need to be creative and think out of the box and come up with angles or ideas or activities that drive attention.
So you have this beautiful win-win-win-win-win model.
Yeah, just wins everywhere.
Just wins. It's all wonderful.
Yeah.
And that makes it sound kind of too good to be true. Like, where are the hard bits? What's been the really sticky moments?
If you're ambitious or you set ambitious goals and you want to grow fast and you want to literally realize a planet with no food waste, but let's take any scale up that has ambitious goals.
Yeah.
You're always going to run into problems and boundaries, right? If I take a more macro lens and I just look at scale ups generally.
Yeah.
And you go back to what I just said, what got us here won't get us there. Mm-hmm. And how you're constantly reevaluating what good looks like. I think you run into so many challenges where you think, how am I going to fix this problem? And that problem wasn't even a problem yesterday. But why I like a scale up is you open one door and there's tumbleweeds. No one has worked on that yet. No one has thought about that yet. It wasn't a problem. And then you open the next door and it's IBM.
Yeah.
There's playbooks and there's documents and there's tracking and there's a degree of sophistication. And you think, ooh, this is great. You can build on this.
Yeah.
And that juxtaposition between quite elementary and basic, we need to build something off the ground, and quite sophisticated and we're quite good at this, I think is a really interesting dynamic.
Is there a third door where it's like IBM, but it's legacy already?
Oh, yes. Well, especially now, I think.
Yeah, I think there's definitely corners where you go, that feels quite knackered.
Yeah.
And 6 months ago, it looked shiny.
Exactly. I think, and what is interesting is with those kind of things, and when you go, as you grow and as you competitors arise or copycats arise, or you move deeper into the addressable market, all of a sudden what was great yesterday won't work anymore, right? The CAC goes up, the users are not as interested, or the arguments don't work anymore, or all of a sudden anything could happen. And it means that your focus shifts because you have finite resources, and all of a sudden you were super focused on this and you nailed it and you thought this is going quite well. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh God, I've got a burning platform here or something that really needs attention because it's knackered or because it's tumbleweeds. And you're constantly shifting that focus. And when you operate a marketplace like 2 years ago, the balance is really important.
Yeah.
And that goes for any marketplace. And God forbid, if you are food delivery, you've got a 3-sided marketplace because you've got riders to balance as well. And the whole point about balance is if you're on the chord, there is a very fine line. So it only takes one step to the left or to the right to have a problem that you need to address.
Yeah.
And constantly balancing supply growth and demand growth, especially when you're growing, is super tough. So you might be focused on supply one day thinking, ooh, this area, we need to boost more supply. Maybe in this particular segment, we need more bakeries, or we want some different brand names, or et cetera, et cetera. And then you focus all your attention on that. And then you do that. And then it's like, but now I really need more demand to do this.
Because they're getting grumpy that they don't have enough customers.
Exactly, because that's a terrible user experience.
Yeah.
So now I need to boost this demand, but that was not really a focus. And now all of a sudden I really, really quickly need to fix this.
Yeah.
And the opposite is also true. Then you boost the demand, you get too much demand, and now you need more supply.
Yeah.
And also those things also happen at different timelines, right? So some of the supply Getting a partner on board, if it's a big international partner, might take 18, 24 months. Whereas user growth is slightly different. And in the early days, the growth was so fast, and it's to a degree it's easier because there's low-hanging fruit and there's early adopters and people get really excited and there's a lot of word of mouth because it's new and exciting and people talk about it and it's awesome, and you just take the growth and deal with the supply at the same time to keep up with that growth. But then you get 120 million users and you move deeper into the addressable markets as some of your mature markets, and then all of a sudden it becomes harder to just acquire huge volumes of users. And all of a sudden retention and understanding your user profiles and understanding the differences between profiles so that you can offer the right content to the right people at the right place and the right time becomes really important. But then because you've not really focused on that, you don't even have different profiles. You don't have data.
Yeah.
You're like, but I don't even know what drives these people. How do I fit in their daily lives? Let alone how can I be habitual and become a thing that people use every week, every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks? Because I want to say the right things to them, but I don't really know what drives them. And that all of a sudden then becomes a huge focus. And then you think, oh, how can I automate messaging, but how can it be relevant? And do I need a segmentation?
Yeah.
And that's a great example of the tumbleweed door where it's like, but that was never a focus because we had
This
users.
is all about penetration.
Exactly.
And then it shifts.
And then all of a sudden you need to be really sophisticated.
Is there a ceiling?
There's always a ceiling. But I think there's a lot of growth in the market still.
Everywhere.
If you look at some of our mature markets, where we have been active for many years, then definitely the majority of those markets have at some point registered for the app. But then
Wow.
people might be coming back. So there's a bigger focus becomes on reactivating users who've maybe lost interest a bit. And then it goes back to how do I drive the consideration, and what is the relevant content that I need to say? And what are the arguments, the triggers, the barriers that I really want to appeal to? So your marketing just fundamentally changes and becomes sophisticated in a completely different.
What do you think makes great marketeers? Who are the best people you've worked with and why?
I think curiosity. I think if you stop asking questions, you've got a real problem. So if you settle and you think, I've nailed the playbook, I know how this works, then you run into a big problem. And I think generally, even if you're not on a scale up, currently so many things are changing so rapidly with technology changing, the market changing, and geopolitical climate changing, that if you don't constantly challenge yourself and ask all the questions that there are to ask, and be curious to understand the market context, the audience context, but also the business context, I think the moment you stop asking those questions, you've got a real problem. So the people who remain hungry and remain curious and then apply creativity to solving the problems that might arise, those are the best marketers. And relentless. Don't stop doing that ever.
Do you think that the profile of a great marketer changed in the 3 years you were with the business? So I have this kind of hypothesis specifically around very early stage businesses where I do a lot of work, that there is a kind of person that really thrives in that moment and doesn't necessarily thrive in a bigger business. And I think the way you've talked about what your job as a CMO is really tells this story about it being a role around leadership and management and not so much about marketing. Which is kind of interesting. And I say this a lot to marketers rising up in their career, that they've got to make a really clear decision as to whether they want the next step into management or leadership or whether they want to stay in marketing. And those are two different routes. So it's really interesting hearing you say that.
Even if you define startup, scale up, and just big established international company, there are definitely profiles that are very well suited to each of those. So if you're in a startup, it's scrappy, it's fast. Maybe you cut a few corners. Maybe quality is of secondary importance because you just need to move and react. And that is suited to some people and not other people who maybe are more considerate and want to take a bit of time to reflect and think and don't really like delivering something that is not 100% perfect.
Okay, yeah, fascinating.
When you go to a scale up, I think you need the agility, you need the flexibility, you need the ability to move fast and the resilience to be open-minded to deal with change. You still need that. but you also need a degree of quality focus and recognizing that details do matter.
And really knowing when to slow down.
Exactly. And really flexing, when do I go deep? When do I go fast? When do I do both?
So interesting.
And also embracing the increasing data that become available, because obviously there is more historical data, there are more external data inputs coming. And how do you start doing more data-led decision-making as opposed to just follow your gut, move fast, focus, do few things? All of a sudden, more things become important. Some of the things that are maybe not as sexy need to happen, because then all of a sudden user segmentations do come in. And then all of a sudden software systems come in. And all of those things become far more important, where it's more scrappy in the initial phase. And I think that is particularly, it can be particularly tricky, I think, to work in a scale up, because you constantly need to recalibrate those expectations. And it's not for everyone to make the transition from that profile to that profile.
Yeah.
Sometimes the competencies, the capabilities, the personalities aren't there to make that transition. Sometimes people like sitting around the kitchen table with their own laptops and getting stuff done.
Yeah.
And that's totally fine.
Yeah.
And maybe they're not there for a company that has however many thousands of people across so many different countries. And I think some people want to go on that journey. Some people don't want to go on that journey. Some people can't go on that journey. And that's super tough. But I definitely think there's different profiles. And as you go bigger, you will naturally go more towards data-led decision-making and test and learn and tools and software, et cetera, the sophistication of those becomes just more and more part of the daily operations.
Because there's more to lose. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's more to manage. At some point, you can just not spreadsheet your way through a business, right? So you need customer data platforms and those kind of stuff, whereas previously it was fine. You were just, we had a handle on it, we kind of got it, or we think we know. And all of a sudden, things that you never even thought about become important.
Yeah.
And tracking and measurement and analytics and MMM.
And this is your, I'm nodding going, that sounds like a lot. Is that your happy place?
I will be vulnerable and open to say, it's a lot. And juggling all of that, especially if you have a really broad remit, and to be able to go from a meeting about econometric modeling to the really intangible definition of your brand positioning, to window stickers, to performance marketing, to a CRM lifecycle, and those to be 5 different meetings sequentially, and you being able to go deep and understand what that conversation is about. That's a lot. I find it very exciting. I get driven by challenge, and if it's not exciting and difficult and I don't learn from it, I don't find it quite as exciting and I get bored. But then equally, I do find it quite hard. So my imposter syndrome is like raging in the background, thinking, oh my God, you are not worthy. But then at the same time, if I do feel worthy.
No way you're going to take an easier option.
No, because then I get bored. It's that balance between, but there's a voice in my head that says, you are not good enough for this. And then there's a voice in my head that says, this is so exciting.
How do you manage that imposter voice?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure I manage it very effectively. I have a coach who I talk to about it. I've always just put in the relentless commitment and dedication to think I'll do whatever it takes to make it work. And if that's good enough, then it's good enough. And if it's not good enough, then it's not good enough. And I'll be the first one to be open and acknowledge that something might not be good enough. I try to be vulnerable and honest and open, and hope that the people I work with respect that and value that.
I can hear in everything you're telling me how much that's a real value for you. Showing up vulnerably was really important to the way you conduct yourself.
Which I've learned over the years.
I'm sometimes aware that that's easy to say when you're at a degree of seniority.
Yeah, fair.
How do you help junior members of the team be vulnerable?
Let's assume that the culture allows for that level of vulnerability, which I think more and more is the case, because I think more companies now are building on that.
But that's great advice in the first place, which is only put yourself in situations where it is valued.
Yes, true. And then I think if you are not sure about something, or you have doubts, or you have questions, I think always ask the questions. Questions are so invaluable, and questions are never a sign of weakness. Questions are a sign of curiosity and a desire to learn, to get better.
Which you just said is like the one essential tenet of of good marketeers and startups and scale ups. Like
Exactly. So if you,
it's actually the failure of asking questions is the issue.
yeah, or yeah, exactly. If you feel uncomfortable to do that, my thing is, you don't have to say, I am bad at this, or I'm weak at this, or I'm insecure about this, but you can ask questions. And I think if you ask enough questions, you can maybe deal with your vulnerability. And also it's a way to be vulnerable without feeling maybe weak. I think a lot of experienced leaders wouldn't necessarily see vulnerability as weakness anyway, but if that is a barrier that you perceive internally and you're afraid of, questions I think is a great way to get out of it.
Yeah.
And then I would hope that a lot of leaders also embrace those questions as meaningful signals to think, how do I help this person be their best person?
Yeah.
And how do I help this person understand the world around them better? And what is it that I've seen, that I've done, that I've read, that I've heard, that I've learned about that would be useful information for this person to feel more comfortable?
Yeah.
And also sometimes acknowledging it's okay. We're going to figure it out together. What's the worst that can happen? And if you don't take risks, we'll never go forward.
Yeah. But this all comes down to I just putting myself in the shoes of someone saying, yeah, but my boss isn't like that.
Yes.
And it's buying the people that are. I do think the workplace is really changing to create more space for this.
I agree. And I also think if you think about a lot of leadership courses that get taught, I think compassionate leadership is really a stream of thought that I think is really popular now, and will deliver more of that. But also, you don't necessarily always need to be vulnerable to your boss. You can be vulnerable to your peers.
That's great advice. Pick your moments, pick your places, find your safe spaces.
Yeah, and if you have a team, but you obviously still have teams above you, you can also be vulnerable to your teams and see how that pans out and see how that works.
Yeah.
So be the person you want to be and be the architect of your own happiness.
Yeah.
And choose the people you feel comfortable with. And I appreciate, it's easy for me to say, I've also been in careers or in jobs where vulnerability was definitely not top of my priority list. It was just get it done and
Survive.
get it done to a high standard.
Yeah.
And I've worked for company cultures from the Far East, and vulnerability is not the thing you need.
Very different.
But that's okay. I had a great experience. I mean, I used to work for a company called Didi, which is a Chinese-born ride-hailing company. They're not big in Europe, but they're big in Latin America and obviously huge in China. So it's a very Chinese culture, but also they've embraced Western culture. And what is really interesting when you work for Chinese companies is they have a cultural trait, or at least I have in my head projected that trait onto them because I thought I saw a pattern there, which is they never hesitate to take the right question, even though the right question leads to a very difficult path. And I think in Western companies, we sometimes can fall in the trap of thinking, oh, this is going to be very hard, so let's just go with the old plan, even though you know deep down that it's not the right one. Or you just maybe move forward with something, even though you're not entirely sure it will actually work. And I think where the Chinese companies or the leaders that I've worked under are very, very inspiring is they will always ask the questions to try and figure out what the right decision is. And then they won't hesitate to take that decision because they recognize it's a good decision. I know it's tough, but we should do it. I mean, I was asked at one point with 6 weeks to go to launch a business in Africa, in a market where we had no people on the ground. None of us had ever been to. The operations team was in Beijing. I was in London. It was an app that didn't exist yet. I had 6 weeks to launch it. And I was like, that feels unrealistic. But it wasn't, because you just get it done and you make it work and you find a way to solve that problem. And it was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had.
Yeah.
And then afterwards you reflect and you think, when you embrace that mindset that you can actually do so much more than you think. And I'm not talking about you need to work 100-hour work weeks. And it's not necessarily about volume. It's also just about problem solving.
Yeah.
When you understand that you can do so much more, it's quite liberating when the sky really is the limit. And I think there's a lot we can learn from those kind of cultures. And vulnerability is not top of their list.
Am I allowed to ask you what you're doing next? Is that on the record, off the record?
No, it's on the record. I don't know yet.
Great.
So the interesting thing is I've been with Too Good To Go for 3 years.
Yeah.
And it's been a hell of a journey. It's a lot of transformation. It is a true privilege to work for the company, to work on the mission, to work with the people that I've worked with, and to witness the growth that we went through and to be part of that. But also, as I just mentioned, with a scale up, it's always important to constantly recalibrate and constantly challenge what we are doing. And sometimes a fresh perspective really helps. And I think it's great that the company will now have a new CMO who comes with new ideas and fresh perspectives, because probably impossible for me to constantly be pushing the boundaries.
I always say to people, I've said this on the podcast before, people are most valuable in the first 3 months in a job and the last 3 months in a job. There's that period in the middle where they get loads of shit done, but you stop seeing your no human brain can maintain perspective when they're in a cult.
That's wise. I'll take that with me.
Yeah, I really think this is true, which is why because I'm about to go on mat leave, I am being so good at my job. Because I'm literally like, desk lie flat. Yeah, you just stop. You
feel so privileged about all those last week.
You stop being apologetic about anything. And I think it's totally human to say, I'm finding it hard to get perspective. And I think this is also a kind of testament to the importance sometimes of consultants.
Yeah.
And why
outside in perspective,
naivety is so helpful. It's not you saying I didn't get this right, to say there were times where I couldn't shake things up because I was so in it.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's totally human.
Yeah, so there's that, and then I've worked for over 20 years and never really taken a break.
Yeah, and that.
And I have a wonderful 8-year-old daughter, and I can't wait to spend a bit more time with her over summer.
Yeah.
So that's definitely next. And then after summer, I'll start something new, hopefully the CMO role. I always optimize for a learning experience and an exciting challenge.
Yeah, you don't like an easy path.
No. So hopefully that will come along, and I look forward to digging in, and hopefully I give myself the patience to wait for a tiny bit.
Yeah.
As opposed to starting next week.
Do you say that because you know that that's not how you work?
I've had this idea of a break once before, and I had 3 days. It was bad. But I got so excited.
Okay, so we're going for 6.
Yeah, exactly. Double,
triple.
But you know how it goes, because then you get excited because you talk to people and you think this is an exciting opportunity, and then you can't stop thinking about it, and you can't wait to jump in.
But interesting life experience to be all into the discipline of a break.
Yes.
And what you will learn. Okay, can you tell that I'm terrified about taking my own break?
Yeah. I really like that you're coaching me through this.
Like, please, internal brain, remember that. Yeah, I think there's a big learning curve in doing something uncomfortable, which might mean some time off.
Yeah, 100%.
Great. Is there a CMO you'd love to hear from? Like, who should I put on my list?
So it's such a good question. Ideally, I come up with a cool, mission-driven, smaller company. That'd be interesting. But I'm not saying it's not mission-driven. So one thing that I get laughed at a lot at Too Good To Go when I was in back-to-back meetings for 50 hours a week is I would never have time for lunch, and I would always drink Huel over lunch. I'm strongly invested in Huel as a company. I would be interested to hear from a marketer how they scaled that business so quickly. I'm fascinated by their vending machines in Heathrow Airport.
Thank you so much for listening. Please now do me a favour and subscribe. If you subscribe, I get to slide into the DMs of more incredibly impressive CMOs, and the more of you that are listening, the more likely they are to say yes, and I get to have these conversations. So it does really make all the difference. If there's someone you'd like me to speak to next, please do drop me a message on LinkedIn and we'll do our best to make it happen.